The first time I saw her on my land, it was 6:42 in the morning. I remember the exact time because the digital clock on my coffee maker had just clicked over. The sun was still a hesitant suggestion behind the eastern ridge, casting long, cool, blue shadows across the pasture. A light mist was rising from the dew-wet grass, and my three heifers, Eleanor, Constance, and Ruth, were dark, solid shapes moving slowly through it. It was a scene of profound peace, a peace I had paid for, not just with money, but with the quiet currency of grief and the patient labor of building a life for one. And then, there was Brenda. She was standing about 30 feet inside my property line, a point demarcated by a rusted, but still legally binding, barbed wire fence I maintained out of respect for history rather than necessity. She was wearing an immaculate pink jogging suit that seemed to vibrate with an angry energy against the muted greens and browns of the morning. In one hand she held a phone to her ear. In the other she was gesticulating wildly toward my cattle. I stood on my back porch, holding a warm ceramic mug of black coffee, and I just watched. My profession had taught me the immense value of observation before action. For 30 years, I had been a contract and property lawyer, not the flashy courtroom kind, but the kind that lived in the fine print, the kind that built impenetrable walls and airtight vessels out of simple, declarative sentences on paper. My work was done in quiet offices, with the scent of old books and hot toner, and it resulted in victories that no one ever saw, because the battles were won before they were ever fought. Conflict in my world was a failure of preparation. Brenda, it seemed, was a walking, talking, pink-clad failure of preparation. She finally spotted me. Her eyes, even from 100 feet away, narrowed. She lowered the phone, her mouth a tight, grim line, and began to march toward my house. Not along the gravel driveway that ran from the county road, but directly across my pasture, her pristine white sneakers sinking into the soft earth and collecting bits of damp soil and whatever else the cows had left behind. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was a good Colombian roast, a small luxury I allowed myself. I did not move. I did not call out. I let her come to me. The aggressor, I have found, is always eager to close the distance. Let them. Let them expend the energy. Let them bring the fight to your ground, where you have already mapped every dip and rise, every potential pitfall. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, craning her neck to look up at me. She was breathing heavily, a mixture of exertion and indignation. "Are you Arthur Pendleton?" she demanded. Her voice was sharp, accustomed to being obeyed. I said nothing. I simply took another sip of coffee and met her gaze. Silence is a powerful tool. People feel an immense pressure to fill it, and when they do, they often give you things. Things you can use later. I am Brenda McLaughlin, president of the Oak Hollow Farms Homeowners Association, she announced, as if presenting credentials at a border crossing. And you are in violation, serious violation. I remained silent. My eyes may have flickered for a moment toward the faded, hand-carved sign hanging by my door. It read, Pendleton Farm, established 1958. Not Oak Hollow Farms, just Pendleton Farm. It had been my father's, and now it was mine. Those things, she pointed a trembling, manicured finger back toward the pasture, where Eleanor was now watching us with the placid curiosity of her species. They have to go, immediately. They are unsightly, they are unsanitary, and they are a gross violation of Article 7, Section 4, Subsection B of the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I finally lowered my mug. Is that so? I said. It was not a question. It was a flat statement, a polished stone dropped into a churning puddle. Her face flushed a deeper shade of pink, clashing horribly with her outfit. Do not play dumb with me, Mr. Pendleton. I am talking about livestock. This is a residential community of distinction, not a barnyard. We have standards. We have aesthetic values to maintain. Your Cows are dragging down the property values of this entire neighborhood. She took a breath, puffing herself up. I have already been on the phone with our legal counsel and the county sheriff. You will receive a notice of violation today. You have 48 hours to remove the animals, or we will begin fining you $500 a day. Per animal. She gave a smug little smile. That's $1,500 a day. I wonder how long you can afford that. I took a final sip of my coffee, draining the mug. I set it down carefully on the porch railing. I then reached into my pocket, pulled out my own phone, and angled it slightly so that the morning sun glinted off the screen. I did not hit record because I had already been recording. The video app had been running since she first set foot on my property. Body-worn cameras have become standard for law enforcement. I had long ago decided they were equally useful for civilian life, especially when dealing with performative tyrants. I looked at her, standing there in my yard, issuing illegal orders, making baseless threats, and quoting from a document that had no more legal authority over me than a copy of a restaurant menu. I looked at her, so supremely confident in her own power, a power she had conjured from thin air, and the timid acquiescence of her neighbors. I looked at her, and a profound sense of weariness washed over me. I had wanted a quiet retirement. I had wanted to read books, tend my small garden, and watch my cattle grow. I had not wanted another case, but she had marched across my land and delivered one directly to my doorstep. She had no idea. She had no idea that my father had bought this land, all 300 acres of it, in 1958. She had no idea that he had sold off the 25 acres that would become the Oak Hollow Farms subdivision in 2005, with the most carefully worded deed restriction I had ever helped him draft. She had no idea that the document she was quoting, the sacred CC and Rs of her little kingdom, contained a clause on page 2, paragraph 3, that explicitly, irrevocably, and perpetually exempted my parcel, the historic Pendleton homestead, from every single one of its rules. She had no idea that I had a notarized, filed, and cross-referenced copy of that document, along with the original plat maps and the minutes from the county zoning board meeting where the exemption was affirmed, sitting in a fireproof safe not 20 feet from where I was standing. She had no idea who she was talking to. She was about to find out. But not today. Today was for observation. Today was for documentation. Thank you for your input, Mrs. McLaughlin, I said, my voice calm and even. I will give your words the consideration they deserve. Her face contorted in a brief spasm of confusion. She had expected a fight, an argument, a shouting match. She was prepared for that. She was not prepared for quiet, polite dismissal. She sputtered for a moment, then seemed to recover her footing. You'll do more than consider it, she snapped. You'll comply, or you'll find out just how serious we are. She turned and began her long, squelching march back to the fence line, leaving a trail of muddy footprints in the green pasture. I watched her go. I picked up my coffee mug and went inside to my office. I sat down at my desk, a large oak piece that had been my father's. I plugged my phone into my computer and downloaded the video file. I named it McLaughlin_trespass_1 and saved it to a folder on my desktop. The folder was labeled, simply, HOA. It was not a new folder. I had created it 6 months ago, the day I received my first friendly, unsolicited Neighborhood Watch newsletter from the Oak Hollow Farms, HOA, even though I was not a member. I had been documenting Brenda McLaughlin's reign of petty terror ever since, and she had no idea she had just voluntarily delivered the keynote exhibit for her own downfall. But before I detail what happened next, I should probably explain how I got here, how a man who craves quiet and order found himself on a collision course with a woman who manufactured chaos for sport. It all started with my wife Eleanor, the real Eleanor. We had been married for 41 years. She was a landscape architect. A woman who saw the world in terms of light and color and texture. I saw it in terms of clauses and easements and liabilities. We were a perfect match. She softened my edges. I gave her structure. For years, her dream was to retire to the farm where I grew up. She had elaborate plans drawn up, not for a grand mansion, but for a restoration. She wanted to bring the old farmhouse back to its simple glory, to plant a wildflower meadow where the old cornfield had been, to have a small herd of cows grazing in the pasture. She loved the gentle, calming presence of cattle. She used to say they were the earth's slow heartbeat. She passed away 3 years ago, after a long illness. The grief was a heavy, suffocating blanket. For a year I did nothing. The farmhouse sat empty. My city apartment felt like a tomb. I was adrift. Then one day, sorting through her papers, I found her drawings for the farm. The wildflower meadow. The restored porch. And in the pasture, 3 cows, sketched in with a soft pencil. She had even given them names in her neat, architectural script. Constance for her mother, Ruth for her favorite Justice, and Eleanor for herself. It was a message in a bottle, a blueprint for survival, so I sold the apartment, packed up my life, and came home. I spent the first year working with my hands, restoring the house just as she had designed it. I hired a local contractor, a good man named Dave, and worked alongside him. I learned how to plaster, how to sand floors, how to reglaze old windows. It was hard, physical work, and it was the best therapy I could have asked for. I felt the weight of grief begin to lift, replaced by the satisfying ache of tired muscles. The last piece of the puzzle was the cows. I knew nothing about cattle, but I am a research man. I read books. I consulted with the local agricultural extension agent. I found a reputable breeder who specialized in heritage breeds. I chose 3 young Jersey heifers, known for their docile nature and gentle eyes. When they arrived, I stood by the fence and introduced myself. "Hello, Eleanor," I said to the one with the white star on her forehead. "Welcome home. My land, the original 300-acre Pendleton farm, is an island, a geographic and legal anomaly. When the interstate was built in the 60s, it cut our property off from the rest of the county's agricultural zone. Then, in the late 90s and early 2000s, residential development began to creep out from the city. My father, a shrewd and far-sighted man, saw the writing on the wall. He knew the developers would come knocking. In 2005, a developer named Markinson Homes made him an offer for a 25-acre parcel on the eastern edge of our property. It was scrub land, not good for grazing or crops. My father was ready to sell, but he was worried. He didn't want a new neighborhood association trying to tell him how to run his farm. I was a junior partner at my firm by then, specializing in this exact type of land transaction. We spent a month drafting the deed. It was my masterpiece. We structured the sale with an explicit, non-severable deed restriction. This restriction established that the 25 acres being sold would be for residential use, and that a homeowners association could be formed. However, and this was the heart of the matter, it also contained what we called the legacy parcel exemption. It stated, in language as clear and strong as forged steel, that the remaining 275 acres of the original Pendleton farm, its current owner, and all their successors and assigns, were forever and completely exempt from any and all covenants, rules, regulations, or authority of any homeowners association formed on the adjacent parcel. It was recorded with the county, filed with the state, and was as much a part of the land's legal DNA as the bedrock beneath it. Oak Hollow Farms was built. Houses went up. People moved in. My father continued to farm his land, and no one said a word. He passed away 10 years ago, and I inherited the property. For a while it was quiet. I leased the pasture to a local rancher, and the neighbors seemed to enjoy seeing the cattle. Then, 2 years ago, Brenda McLaughlin was elected president of the HOA. I started hearing things. A neighbor, a retired teacher named Mr. Henderson, told me over the fence one day. He was a gentle soul who grew prize-winning roses. Brenda had forced him to rip out a row of antique bushes his late wife had planted because they were not on the HOA's approved foliage list. He was heartbroken. Another family was fined because their basketball hoop was, according to Brenda, aesthetically displeasing. She ruled the 25 acres like a tin pot dictator. Her power was built on a foundation of intimidation, public shaming at HOA meetings, and a blizzard of violation notices for trivial matters. I paid it no mind at first. It was not my circus, not my monkeys. My property was an untouchable sovereign nation. But then the newsletters started appearing in my mailbox, addressed to current resident. They were filled with passive-aggressive reminders about lawn maintenance and trash can placement. I ignored them. The first direct contact came in the form of a letter, a formal, letter-headed document from the Oak Hollow Farms HOA. It was a welcome to the neighborhood letter, which was odd since my family had been in the neighborhood for half a century before the neighborhood existed. It helpfully informed me of my obligations as a homeowner, including dues, lawn care standards, and I remember smiling grimly at this. A strict prohibition on livestock. This was the moment, the first probe, the first test. I knew how this worked. I had seen it 100 times in my career. It was a classic encroachment strategy. You start with a friendly letter. If there's no pushback, you send a bill for dues. If that gets paid, you have established a precedent. You have created a de facto relationship where none existed in law. The recipient, by their own inaction or ignorance, has tacitly agreed to your authority. I did not respond, but I did not throw the letter away. I opened my filing cabinet, the one I had brought from my old law office. I created a new file, a hanging folder, green, with a crisp, new label. I typed the label myself. HOA. I placed the letter inside. It was the first document in what I knew, with a weary certainty, would become a very thick file. Over the next 6 months, the file grew. A notice of overdue dues I did not pay, a warning letter about the length of the grass along the county road, a notice that my unapproved fence, the one that had been there since the Eisenhower administration, was not in compliance. I cataloged each one. I scanned them, saved them digitally with date-stamped file names, and placed the originals in the green folder. I kept the receipts, so to speak. Even when I hadn't bought anything, I was building a record, a paper trail of harassment and overreach. Then I brought the heifers home, and that, it seemed, was a bridge too far for Brenda. Her performative tyranny required a visible enemy, and my gentle cows had been cast in the role. Her mistake was thinking I was just some old man who liked animals. She thought she was punching down at a feeble retiree. She had no idea she was stepping into a meticulously prepared legal arena with a man who had spent his entire life designing and defending the very ground she was standing on. The day after her trespass, the promised letter arrived via certified mail. I signed for it, of course. A signed certified mail receipt is a beautiful thing. It is a legally binding acknowledgement of communication. It proves they sent it, and it proves I received it. It eliminates any future claim that I was not properly notified. The letter was a masterpiece of blustering legalese, clearly drafted by an aggressive, but not particularly bright attorney. It cited Article 7, Section 4, Subsection B. It gave me the 48-hour deadline. It detailed the fine structure, $500 per day, per animal, to be assessed as a lien against my property. A lien. That was a serious escalation. A lien is a legal claim on a property for the satisfaction of a debt. If unpaid, it can lead to foreclosure. It was a declaration of war. A stupid, suicidal war, but a war nonetheless. They were threatening to take my home, my land, my father's legacy, and Eleanor's dream, because of 3 gentle cows. I did not call their lawyer. I did not call Brenda. I did not storm over to the next HOA meeting. A direct confrontation at this stage would be a mistake. It would be my word against hers. It would be emotional, messy, and unproductive. My battlefield was not the shouting match. It was the written record. So I went back to my desk and got to work. First, I drafted my own letter. a response. I am a firm believer in creating my own paper trail. My letter was short, professional, and devastating. It was addressed to the HOA Board of Directors, care of their legal counsel. It began, Your correspondence of date regarding parcel number, my parcel number. The first paragraph acknowledged receipt of their letter. The second paragraph respectfully informed them that they were mistaken. The third paragraph was the kill shot. It read, For your reference and clarification, please see the deed of sale, recorded on date, in the County Registry of Deeds, book number, page number. Specifically, we direct your attention to the legacy parcel exemption clause on page 2, paragraph 3, which states, and I quote, the exact, verbatim text of the exemption clause. As the current owner of the aforementioned legacy parcel, I am, by law and by contract, exempt from all authority, covenants, and regulations of the Oak Hollow Farms Homeowners Association. Your attempt to levy fines or place a lien upon my property is therefore legally baseless and constitutes tortious interference with my property rights. I concluded the letter by stating that I now considered the matter closed, but should they choose to pursue it further, I would be forced to seek all available legal remedies, including sanctions against their counsel for filing frivolous claims. I printed the letter on my old legal letterhead, a thick, creamy bond paper that felt substantial in the hand. I enclosed a clear, high-quality photocopy of the relevant page from the deed, with the exemption clause highlighted in yellow. I sent the letter via certified mail, with return receipt requested. I also sent a copy via email to their lawyer, with a delivery and read receipt enabled. I wanted a digital footprint, as well as a physical one. Documentation. It's the brick and mortar of any legal case. For a week there was silence. A beautiful, peaceful silence. I started to hope, against my better judgment, that this was the end of it, that the sight of that deed, that clear, unambiguous language had been enough, that their lawyer had advised them to stand down, to retreat, to leave the old man and his cows alone. I was wrong. Hope, in these situations, is a luxury. The response, when it came, was not a letter. It was an action. One morning I went out to check on the girls and found a new addition to my pasture. Someone, and I had a very good idea who, had pounded a cheap wooden stake into the ground about 50 feet inside my fence line. Tied to it was a fluttering piece of pink surveyor's tape. And on my gate, the main gate leading to the county road, was a large, laminated sign. It was an official-looking sign, with the Oak Hollow Farms logo. It read, Future site of the Oak Hollow Farms Community Dog Park. Construction begins soon. They had ignored my letter. They had ignored the deed. They had ignored the law. They had decided to simply pretend my property was theirs. This was a new level of delusion, a new height of arrogance. It was also a new level of trespass. I took a photo of the sign. I took a photo of the stake. I walked the perimeter of the supposed dog park with my GPS-enabled phone, mapping its coordinates. I documented everything. Then I pulled the stake out of the ground. It was flimsy and came up with a wet, sucking sound. I took down the sign. I did not destroy them. I placed them in my barn as evidence. Then I went back to my office. It was time to move from defense to offense. It was time to call my own corroborating professional. I called Maria. Maria had been my paralegal for the last 15 years of my career. She was sharp, relentless, and a digital native who could find a misfiled document in a county server from 3 states away. She had retired when I did, but we kept in touch. Arthur, she said, her voice warm. Don't tell me you're bored and want to unretire. Worse, Maria, I said. I have a pro bono case, and the client is me. I explained the situation. I emailed her the contents of my HOA folder, Brenda's first trespass video, the letters, my response, the photos of the dog park sign. She was silent for a long moment after I finished. Arthur, she said finally, a note of steel in her voice. This woman is a menace, That lying threat alone is grounds for a bar complaint against her lawyer if he actually tries to file it. I know, I said, but I don't want to just win. I want this to stop, permanently, not just for me but for the whole neighborhood she's terrorizing. I need a broader strategy. I want you to do a deep dive on two things. First, Brenda McLaughlin. I want to know everything. Where she's lived, what she's done, any prior history of this kind of behavior in other communities. Second, I want every single document related to the formation and operation of the Oak Hollow Farms, HOA. I want the articles of incorporation, the minutes from every meeting that have been publicly filed, the tax returns, everything. I have a feeling that people who are this sloppy and arrogant in their public actions are just as sloppy in their private paperwork. Consider it done, Maria said. This is more fun than my gardening club. I'll set up a secure digital file for us to share. Let's go hunting, Arthur. While Maria went to work in the digital world, I decided to do some groundwork in the physical one. It was time to talk to Mr. Henderson. I found him tending his new HOA approved and utterly soulless rose bushes. They were a generic, hardy hybrid, all the same shade of bland red. He looked up as I approached the fence. "Morning, Arthur," he said, but his eyes were guarded. In Brenda's kingdom, talking to the designated enemy was a risky act. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice low, "I'm not here to cause you any trouble. I just have a question. You mentioned once that Brenda made you rip out your wife's roses. Did you get that order in writing?" He paled. He looked over his shoulder toward the street, as if Brenda herself might materialize. "Arthur, I don't want any more problems." "I know you don't," I said gently, "and I'm sorry to even ask. But people like Brenda, they count on good people like you being afraid. They count on us being isolated. I'm not going to be afraid anymore, and I'm not going to be isolated. But I need help. The kind of help that lives in file cabinets and email archives." He looked at his new roses with a deep sadness. He looked at my pasture, where Eleanor, Constance, and Ruth were grazing peacefully. He looked back at me. He seemed to make a decision. "She held a special board meeting," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "just to discuss my roses, my wife's roses. She called them a blight. She had the other two board members, they're terrified of her, vote to declare them a violation. She recorded the meeting. She's proud of it. She uses it as an example." "Did you get a copy of the minutes from that meeting, Mr. Henderson?" I asked. He hesitated. Then a small, defiant smile touched his lips. "No," he said. "I did one better. My son gave me one of those digital voice recorders. I took it with me. I have an audio recording of the entire meeting." I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years. It was the thrill of the hunt, the feeling of a case clicking into place. "Mr. Henderson," I said, "you are a braver man than you think." That evening Maria called. She was excited. "Arthur, you are not going to believe this. The Oak Hollow Farms HOA is a mess on paper. They haven't filed proper tax returns in 2 years. Their corporate status with the state is listed as delinquent, but that's not the bombshell." "Go on," I said, leaning forward in my chair. "Oh, I did the search on Brenda McLaughlin. She moved here from Florida 4 years ago. And what do you think she did in Florida? She was the president of the Coral Gables Estates HOA, and she was removed from that position by a court order after it was discovered she had been embezzling funds. Small amounts, a few $100s here and there from the social committee budget, but it was a pattern. She was forced to pay it back to avoid prosecution. She sold her house and moved to here a month later." I was stunned. "She's a grifter. She's a petty tyrant who uses HOA rules as a cover for her own ego, and, when she can get away with it, her wallet," Maria corrected. "But wait, there's more. I've been looking at the survey maps, the one you sent me from 2005, and the official county plat maps. I overlaid them with the satellite imagery and the tax parcel data. And there's a discrepancy," she said, her voice dropping with excitement. "It's small, only about 15 feet, but it's consistent. The survey that the developer filed for the HOA plat map in 2005 seems to have a calculation error. It looks like they used the wrong benchmark for the eastern boundary. According to the original county survey, The one your deed is based on. The boundary of your property, your legal, actual property, is 15 feet further east than the HOA's own map shows. I sat back, my mind racing. I pictured the fence line, the county road, the entrance to the subdivision. Maria, I said slowly, are you telling me that the entrance to the Oak Hollow Farms subdivision, the fancy brick sign, the manicured flower beds, the first 20 feet of their main road, is actually on my property? There was a pause on the line. Then Maria's triumphant, joyous laughter. Bingo, Arthur. According to the original Legally Superior survey, they built their front door on your front lawn. She had no idea. Brenda McLaughlin, in her quest to seize a piece of my pasture for a dog park, had no idea that she was already a tenant on my land. An unwitting, unpaying, and now very unwelcome tenant. This was the bombshell. This was the weapon I had been looking for. Not just a shield to defend myself, but a sword. A very sharp, very precise sword. But a weapon this powerful has to be deployed at the right time, in the right way. Not in a letter. Not in a phone call. It needed a stage. It needed an audience. It needed to be unveiled at a moment of maximum impact. Brenda was fond of public spectacle. It was time to give her one she would never forget. The next day, as if on cue, she provided me with the perfect opportunity. It came in the form of 2 sheriff's deputies. I was in the barn, mucking out the stalls, when I saw the patrol car pull up my driveway. It stopped near the house. 2 deputies got out. One was older, with the weary look of a man who had seen everything. The other was younger, sharp, and alert. Brenda was right behind them in her gleaming, white SUV. She practically bounded out of the car, her face a mask of righteous fury. She was performing again, and now she had an official audience. I walked out to meet them, wiping my hands on a rag. I was wearing old jeans, muddy boots, and a sweat-stained shirt. I probably looked exactly like the simple-minded old farmer she thought I was. Perfect. That's him, that's the man, Brenda shouted, pointing at me. He's threatening me, and his animals are a public nuisance. They're dangerous. On cue, Eleanor the heifer stuck her head over the nearby fence and let out a soft, inquisitive moo. The older deputy, whose name tag read Sutton, sighed. It was a sigh that contained multitudes. He turned to me. Sir, are you Arthur Pendleton? I am, I said calmly. Ma'am, what is the nature of the complaint exactly? The younger deputy, Miller, asked Brenda. He's violating the law, she insisted. We have an HOA, there are rules. No livestock, it's a health hazard. And when I tried to inform him, he became belligerent. I fear for my safety. Deputy Sutton looked at me, a man in his late 60s, covered in hay. He looked at Brenda, vibrating with manic energy. He looked at the cow. He seemed to be struggling to keep a straight face. Sir, he said to me, his voice flat, this is a civil matter. The sheriff's department does not enforce HOA regulations. Of course you do, Brenda interjected. It's about maintaining order, property values. He's trespassing on our common area. This was a beautiful, unintentional gift. She had just, on camera, because I knew Deputy Miller's body cam was recording, accused me of trespassing on my own land, while simultaneously claiming a part of my land as her own. Deputy Miller, I said, looking directly at the younger officer and his camera. For the record, my name is Arthur Pendleton. I am the sole owner of this property, parcel number, my parcel number. This woman, Brenda McLaughlin, has been repeatedly trespassing on my land. She has issued threats of financial harm and has attempted to illegally seize my property. I have formally notified her and her association in writing that they have no jurisdiction here. I am, at this moment, standing on my own private property. I then turned to Brenda. Mrs. McLaughlin, for the record, I am once again telling you to leave my property. Your continued presence here constitutes trespass. Brenda's face went purple. This is absurd. He's the one. Officer, arrest him. Deputy Miller held up a hand. Ma'am, please, let me see your identification. He then looked at me. Sir, do you have proof of ownership? A deed? A tax bill? I do, I said. It's in my house, but I can do you one better. I walked over to the fence post next to my gate. Nailed to it, years ago by my father, was a small, weatherproof metal plaque. It was the official survey marker from the 1958 plat. This is the official survey marker for the northwest corner of my property. The legal description is filed with the county. Everything you see behind me, all the way to that far ridge, is part of this parcel. The Oak Hollow Farms subdivision is over there, I pointed east, on the other side of this fence. Miller knelt and looked at the marker. He was thorough. He understood the importance of physical evidence. Sutton, meanwhile, was trying to get Brenda to calm down. "Ma'am, this is clearly a property line dispute," Sutton said, his patience wearing thin. "This is for the courts to decide, not law enforcement on the side of the road." But Brenda was not to be deterred. She played her trump card. "Fine. If you won't do anything about the trespass, what about the animal cruelty? The public health risk? These animals are clearly diseased. They're a danger to our children." She pulled out her phone. "I am calling 911 right now and reporting a public health emergency." This was the moment, the grand, desperate, over-the-top escalation I had been waiting for. The older deputy, Sutton, actually face-palmed. Deputy Miller stood up and said, "Ma'am, that is not a good idea. That is not what 911 is for." But she was already dialing. "Yes, hello. I need to report an emergency. There are diseased animals running loose. It's a farm on the edge of the Oak Hollow subdivision. Yes, cows, they look sick. They're moaning. I think they might be rabid." Eleanor, at that exact moment, let out a loud, long, and perfectly healthy-sounding moo, as if to protest this slander. The deputies and I stood in stunned silence as we listened to Brenda's one-sided, hysterical conversation. She was giving the dispatcher an Academy Award-worthy performance of a terrified citizen. Then, something incredible happened. We could hear the dispatcher's voice, tinny and small, from Brenda's phone. The dispatcher said, "Ma'am, please, hold one moment. We have a protocol for this. I'm patching in the appropriate authority." Brenda's face lit up with triumph. She looked at me, a smug, victorious sneer on her lips. "See?" she mouthed. "Appropriate authority." She thought she was getting a SWAT team. A new voice came on the line. It was a man's voice, calm, professional, with a slight country drawl. "Ma'am, this is Commissioner Thompson with the State Department of Agriculture. My office monitors emergency calls regarding livestock. You're reporting diseased cattle near Oak Hollow Farms?" Brenda's smugness faltered for a fraction of a second. This wasn't the response she expected. The Agriculture Commissioner was not on her list of approved minions. But she quickly recovered. "Yes, finally, someone who understands. These cows are a menace." "And what are their symptoms, ma'am?" the Commissioner asked. They're moaning, and they're foaming at the mouth," she improvised wildly. At this point, my heifer Constance, who had been lazily chewing her cud, let a long string of drool and half-chewed grass dangle from her mouth. It was, technically, foaming. The sheer, beautiful irony of it was not lost on me. "I see," the Commissioner said. His voice was still calm, but I could hear a new edge to it, a professional edge. "And whose animals are they?" "They belong to him," Brenda shrieked, pointing at me. "Arthur Pendleton." There was a pause on the line, a long, pregnant pause. Then the Commissioner's voice came back, but this time, it was filled with warmth and recognition. "Arthur Pendleton, the lawyer. Is that you I hear sighing in the background?" I stepped forward. "Hello, Frank," I said, my voice loud enough for the phone to pick up. "It's been a while." Frank Thompson and I had served together on a statewide land use advisory board for 5 years. We had spent countless hours debating zoning laws, water rights, and, yes, livestock regulations. He was one of the sharpest, most no-nonsense public servants I had ever known. Brenda's face, which had been a mask of triumph, was now crumbling. Her jaw was slack. Her eyes were wide with confusion and dawning horror. "Arthur!" Frank's voice boomed from the phone. Well, I'll be. What in the world is going on over there? Last I heard, you were retiring to raise prize-winning heifers, not rabid beasts. I'm trying to, Frank, I said, but this lady, Mrs. McLaughlin, seems to have a different plan for my property. She seems to think my girls are a public health crisis. Is that right? Frank said. Well, Mrs. McLaughlin, let me tell you something about Arthur Pendleton's cattle. I helped him source that stock myself from the best heritage breeder in the state. Those heifers have had more vaccinations than a kindergarten class. They get checked by a vet twice a year. Their health records are more complete than mine. Ma'am, you have a better chance of catching a disease from your own steering wheel than from one of Art's cows. He wasn't finished. And as for the moaning, ma'am, that's called mooing. It's how they talk. And the foaming, that's called chewing cud. It's how they eat. And as for your 911 call, you should know that filing a false report, especially one that triggers a response from a state-level agency like mine, is a Class C misdemeanor. Now, Deputy Sutton, you're on the scene, aren't you? The older deputy, who had been watching this all unfold with a look of grim amusement, stepped forward. Yes, Commissioner, I'm here. Good, Frank said. Please take down Mrs. McLaughlin's information. My office will be in touch regarding the misuse of emergency services. Arthur, you have my number. Call me if you have any more trouble. And with that, the line went dead. Brenda stood frozen, her phone still pressed to her ear. The color had drained from her face. She looked like a statue. A very pink, very shocked statue. Deputy Sutton tipped his hat to me. Mr. Pendleton, have a nice day. Deputy Miller gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. He turned to Brenda. Ma'am, he said, his voice now devoid of any warmth. I'm going to need to see your driver's license. I went back to my barn. I had a lot of work to do. But I was smiling. The public spectacle had occurred, just not the one Brenda had planned. And it was all recorded on Deputy Miller's body camera. A beautiful, official, undeniable piece of evidence. The incident with the sheriff and the agriculture commissioner was a turning point. It was no longer just a private dispute. It was now a matter of public record. The coalition was beginning to form, even without my direct intervention. A few days later, Mr. Henderson appeared at my gate, holding a small thumb drive. I heard what happened, he said, a look of newfound courage in his eyes. Brenda tried to call an emergency HOA board meeting to have you declared a public nuisance, and no one would second the motion. Not even her usual cronies. They're spooked. He handed me the drive. This is the recording of my Rose meeting. Use it, for all of us. Then an anonymous email arrived in my inbox. It was from a generic, untraceable address. It contained a single attachment. The agenda for the upcoming annual HOA meeting. The main item was discussion and vote on special assessment for legal action against non-compliant property owner, Pendleton. Brenda was doubling down. She was going to try to get the entire neighborhood to fund her private war against me. The email also contained the board's private contact information. A leak. I had a disillusioned insider. It had to be Carol. Brenda's final desperate escalation came a week before the meeting. A process server showed up at my door and handed me a thick packet of documents. She had filed for a temporary protective order against me. In the filing, she claimed I was stalking her, that I had threatened her, and that my menacing behavior made her fear for her life. The hearing was set for the day after the HOA meeting. It was a classic, nasty legal tactic. It was designed to overwhelm me, to paint me as the aggressor, and to tie me up in court. She had no idea she was handing me the one thing I still needed: a formal, legal venue to present my evidence under oath. The night of the HOA meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. Brenda had clearly rallied her supporters, a handful of people who benefited from her selective enforcement of the rules. But the rest of the room was filled with faces I recognized from the neighborhood. Mr. Henderson, sitting in the front row, the family with the basketball hoop, dozens of others who had been fined or harassed, all drawn by the scent of a rebellion. Maria was there too, sitting in the back with a laptop, my quiet, corroborating professional. The meeting started. After some tedious procedural matters, Brenda stood up to address the main agenda item. Her voice trembled with practiced emotion. "My dear friends and neighbors," she began, clutching a sheaf of papers, "we are at a crossroads. For years we have worked to build a community of beauty, safety, and high property values." She paused, dabbing a dry eye with a tissue. "But now, one man threatens to undo it all. Arthur Pendleton, a man who believes he is above our rules, has brought blight and danger to our doorstep. His filthy animals threaten our children's health. His belligerent attitude threatens our peace. He has refused all our reasonable attempts to resolve this. Now, he leaves us no choice. We must take strong legal action. We must place a lien on his property. We must force him to comply. I am asking for your support tonight, for a special assessment to fund the legal battle that will protect our homes and our way of life." She sat down to a smattering of applause from her core supporters. The room was tense. The board's treasurer, a nervous-looking man, began to explain the proposed assessment. I stood up. "Madam President," I said, my voice carrying through the quiet room, "may I be permitted to address the members?" Brenda looked at me, a flicker of panic in her eyes. But she was trapped. Denying me the right to speak would look tyrannical. "You have 3 minutes," she snapped. "Thank you," I said. I walked to the front of the room, to a small lectern they had set up. I placed a single, thick, green file folder on it. My HOA folder. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. My family has owned the land next to yours for 65 years. I am not a member of your association, but since you are proposing to spend your members' money to sue me, I feel it is only fair that they understand the full context of the case you are asking them to fund." I opened the folder. "First, let's talk about jurisdiction." I held up a document. "This is a copy of the 2005 deed of sale for the land your homes are built on. It was drafted by my firm. I would like to read you one sentence from it." I read the legacy parcel exemption clause, slowly and clearly. "Your own founding document, the very deed that created your subdivision, explicitly states that you have no authority over my land. None. Any legal action you take based on your CC and res is doomed to fail, and your lawyer knows it, or should know it. By proceeding, he is exposing this association to a suit for malicious prosecution." A murmur went through the room, and Brenda's face was hardening. "Second, let's talk about a pattern of behavior." I looked at Mr. Henderson. He gave me a nod. "Your president has accused me of being a nuisance. I submit that the real nuisance is a leadership that harasses its members over trivial matters. I have here," I held up the thumb drive, "an audio recording of a board meeting where your president and her board spent 45 minutes debating the aesthetic merits of a deceased woman's rose bushes, causing immense pain to a grieving husband. Is this what you want your dues paying for?" Mr. Henderson stood up. "It's true," he said, his voice shaking but strong. "She made me rip out my wife's garden." The murmur grew louder. Brenda was on her feet. "This is out of order. This is a private matter." "Is it?" I asked. "Or is it a pattern of abuse of power? A pattern that extends to financial mismanagement?" I looked at Maria. She nodded. "I have here the public filings of this HOA. They show you are delinquent in your state corporate filings and your tax returns. I also have a court order from Coral Gables, Florida, showing that a Brenda McLaughlin was removed as HOA president there for embezzling funds. Is that also a private matter?" The room erupted. Brenda was pale as a sheet. "Lies! Slander!" she screamed. "Facts," I corrected calmly. "Documented facts. But let's get to the heart of the matter. The land. You want to sue me over my land? Let's talk about my land." Maria dimmed the lights, and a projector flickered on. The first image was the Oak Hollow Farms plat map, the one they all knew. The second image was the original 1958 county survey map. "The map on the left is what you think your neighborhood looks like," I explained. "The map on the right is the legal reality. Your map was based on a flawed survey with a 15-foot error." Maria then overlaid the two maps. A red line appeared, slicing through the entrance of the subdivision. That red line is the actual legal boundary of my property. As you can see, your grand entrance, your sign, your expensive landscaping, and the first 20 feet of your road are, and always have been, on my land. You are all technically trespassing every time you come home." There was a collective gasp. It was silent. Utter, profound silence. "For years I have allowed this trespass out of a sense of neighborly goodwill," I continued. "An easement I was happy to provide for free, but that goodwill has been abused. Your president has declared war on me, on my property, so the easement is revoked. As of tomorrow morning I will be fencing off my property line, the legal property line. You may want to make arrangements for an alternative entrance to your community. I suspect the back road through the industrial park is still open." Chaos. People were shouting. The treasurer looked like he was going to be sick, but I was not done. "And finally," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "your president's most recent act of desperation. She called 911, claiming my cows were a rabid health emergency. She thought she was calling the police. Instead, she got the state agriculture commissioner, a man I happen to know personally, a man who was not amused. We have the audio of that call. Maria, play the call." She played it. The whole thing. Brenda's hysterical performance, the dispatcher, and then Frank Thompson's calm, authoritative voice, systematically dismantling her lies, identifying me as a friend, and informing her she was being investigated for filing a false report. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Every eye was on Brenda. The mask was gone. There was no performance left. There was only a hollow-eyed woman who had just seen her entire world, a world built on lies and bluster, evaporate in a blaze of documented truth. She didn't say a word. She just sank back into her chair, a smaller, grayer figure than the vibrant tyrant who had stood there minutes before. The vote for the special assessment was called. It was defeated unanimously. A motion was immediately made from the floor to recall Brenda McLaughlin as president. It passed by a thunderous voice vote. The meeting was adjourned. The rain was over. The next morning at my TPO hearing, Brenda did not show up. Her lawyer, looking deeply uncomfortable, informed the judge that his client wished to withdraw her petition. The judge, who had clearly been briefed, looked at me. "Mr. Pendleton, do you have anything to add?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "I believe the matter is resolved." I did not mention the fence. I did not mention the embezzling or the false 911 call. I had won. There was no need to salt the earth. The aftermath was swift and quiet. The HOA, under new, humbled leadership, hired a surveyor. The surveyor confirmed Maria's findings. Their first official act was to send a letter, drafted by a new, more competent lawyer, asking if I would be willing to grant them a formal, written easement for their entrance in exchange for a full and final release of all claims and a public apology. I agreed. They also paid my legal fees, which were minimal, as I had done most of the work myself, but I sent them a modest bill as a matter of principle. Brenda McLaughlin sold her house and moved away within a month. No one knew where she went. It was as if she had been a ghost, a bad dream that the community was waking up from. The HOA rescinded every fine she had issued in the past year. Mr. Henderson was given a formal apology and a gift certificate to a local nursery. He planted a new rose garden filled with old, fragrant, and gloriously non-compliant varieties. He named one of them Eleanor. My life returned to the quiet I had so desperately craved. The new HOA president, a quiet woman who taught history at the local high school, sometimes stops by to bring me cookies and ask questions about the original deed. We talk about local history. We have become friends. Mr. Henderson and I now have coffee on my porch once a week. The green folder sits on a shelf in my office. It is thick with documents, a testament to a battle I never wanted to fight but was prepared to win. Sometimes I take it down and look through it. The letters, the photos, the maps, the receipts. It is a story told in paper and ink, a quiet lesson in the difference between power and authority. Brenda had power for a time, but it was a borrowed, fragile thing. I had authority. It was rooted in the land, in the law, and in the truth. This morning I stood on my porch drinking my coffee. It was 6:42 a.m. The sun was rising. The mist was on the pasture. Eleanor, Constance, and Ruth were grazing peacefully. It was a scene of profound peace, a peace I had paid for, a peace I had protected. And as I watched the sun burn the last of the mist away, I realized that this was what my Eleanor had wanted all along. Not just a house, not just a farm, but a home. A place of order, a place of sanctuary, a place where the rules were clear, the boundaries were respected, and the cows were safe. And it was. It finally, truly was.